Hey guys, it's Toniko Pantoja, and for this video, I do want to make some general advice for beginning story artists or people who are interested in doing storyboards. I love doing storyboards because of the storytelling aspects of it. I can pitch something on the go, and eventually I can turn those storyboards into an animatic that can be enjoyed as a video. Whether it's for video games, live action, animation, whether you want to do it for fun or whether you want to try and get work as a storyboard artist in the industry, I just want to share some very general tips and advice when you're doing storyboards. Now, these aren't organized in a particular order. They're just general notes that I would like to give to a beginning story artist and something that I do practice on a general basis. Now, the first advice of storyboarding I'd like to give is the important stage of storyboarding, which is the thumbnailing stage. In my opinion, this is true storyboarding. This is like the core of storyboarding. It's not just pretty drawings, it's not just really nice detailed art, it's just clarity in the storytelling. So when you're thinking about a storyboard sequence, my advice is to think about small little drawings that are fast to draw, easy to draw, that shouldn't be super laborious. It's just there to get the idea across on the staging, on the overall context, and the composition, etc. Because once you have the thumbnails, you can pretty it up later. You can add tones, you can do stuff with it, you can make it cleaner. But the point of the thumbnail is to explore what this sequence could look like without putting it too much labor. And it gives you space to experiment, to play around, to change things before committing to fully finished boards. And once you have everything figured out through thumbnails, then you can polish it later. For work, I usually present thumbnails to show my supervisors and my directors the idea that I'm going for. And once things get approved, then I can move on to making the boards look as nice and as solid as possible. And look, since my channel is all about learning things, I do need to bring up the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. Skillshare is a platform where you can learn many different types of skills, ranging from creativity to business skills, organization skills, social skills, and other lifestyle skills. A lot of the classes offered are led by people at the top of their game or professionals. You can treat it as casual as a hobby, or it can be a good place to jumpstart your career that you want to invest in. I love learning from other artists, and it's kind of cool to see some artists that I admire have their own classes through Skillshare. Gabriel Piccolo is one of my favorite artists online because he captures the nuances in life, the everyday life of such rich characters. So it's been great actually catching some of his classes on Skillshare. Currently, I'm trying to understand his way of doing appealing emotions as well as cloth. In fact, here's an art piece that I did that was inspired by Gabriel Piccolo, which of course you can catch his class on Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. I'm telling you, it's so worth it. Now, another advice that I'd like to give, that something that I've been practicing lately and more recently, is to prepare a shot list. I basically write one line or one sentence for each shot, describing how far or how big the shot is, whether it's a high angle or low angle, and just the general composition, whether it's over the shoulder, whether it's a point of view. The reason why I started doing this is because when I'm storyboarding, I kind of have a general idea of how the scene goes in my head, so I'd like to capture that as fast as I can. I notice that when I thumbnail as the scene is playing in my head, I tend to second guess my shot choices, my decisions, and I keep changing the same shot over and over again, deciding what to go with. But I think the point of writing is just to have something down so you know where the scene goes, where the scene ends, and you can keep track of how many shots there are in your sequence. So when I do draw it, I have something to refer to. I can make changes later on, but I think the creative and the decision-making aspect of which shots to use is already established in writing. It allows me to plan ahead without having to waste so much energy just trying to figure out what shot to use by just drawing it. I think I can figure that stuff later on, as long as I have a clear outline of what my scene looks like. Now, this isn't a mandatory note. A lot of storyboard artists don't work this way. I started working this way because I second guess myself a lot and I want to make those creative decisions figured out already. The next one I want to talk about is practicing your shorthand. So when you do a rough pass of storyboarding, once you're done thumbnailing it, you can start polishing those panels, making the poses stronger, making the drawings cleaner, adding some tones here and there, but still relatively quick to do. So you do have to come up with a system of how to draw your characters fast and something that resembles the character. So in technical drawing like in animation, you kind of have to figure out the construction and making things on model, whereas with storyboards, it's more just about clarity in the broader sense. The clarity of the performances, the readability, not a lot of line mileage, something that's very easy to read and something that's very fast to draw. So another way of viewing this is like a graphic version of the character. Maybe pushing certain shapes so they're easy to read, or drawing the character as much as you can until you understand the character's form without having to draw construction lines, without having to figure out every single detail, because that's not really important in the storyboarding stage. If you need to, you can do that later, but it's good for every storyboard artist to practice a shorthand. The next one I want to talk about is indicate your horizon lines and vanishing points. So perspective is pretty important, especially if you want to get into the action genre. But I think it's important in every department or any style, because a lot of measurements, keeping tracks with proportions of the characters, does still utilize some form of perspective, horizon line, or vanishing point. When I thumbnail, I just indicate a vanishing point with some lines and a horizon line, or if it's a shot that really does require a 2-point perspective, I'll kind of indicate some form of 2-point perspective in there. It helps inform the staging too if you indicate perspective lines or grids. So if you feel like perspective is something that you want to improve on or think about more or work on, I think it's good to force yourself to indicate some horizon lines, some perspective lines, and make use of some vanishing points. Don't worry about having fancy shots. And now sometimes I fall into this trap because I want to have really nice, juicy storytelling, complicated shots, but sometimes it works against you. It can sometimes make the sequence feel a bit too busy, so I've actually forced myself to utilize more simple, easy to do shots. Whether it's a medium high angle, medium low angle, medium shot, a simple extreme wide, or a simple extreme close up, I try to keep it simple. This is so that I can focus more on the clarity of the story sequence and the storytelling aspect of it. And then from there, you can replace some shots with inserts, whether you want to punch in a close up, whether you want to bring the camera out to have a really fancy shot, whether you want to reuse a shot. It's easier to reuse a simple shot in terms for editing than it is to reuse a complicated shot. I think it's just important to focus on very simple shots, and if you want, you can plus it up later with more unique shots. So with that being said, I think it's important to plan your layout or to plan your scene. So if you're working with an existing set, if characters are interacting with the background and they move around the set, I think it's good to sort of like plan that before you even start storyboarding or during the thumbnail stage. Sometimes I make a little blueprint or map of my storyboard sequence where the characters are standing, where they might move, just so that I can have a better understanding of what happens in my scene. Some storyboard artists do beat boards, or like boards that represent a major beat in the story sequence. I personally don't usually think that way, but it's an option that you can use. I like to have a sort of map or diorama of where my set is, where my scene is, and play around with that. I think it's a good idea to study other films or animation. And I did a video talking about cinematic shots and how I personally would define a cinematic shot. And something that I would say is when you're, let's say, studying film and you really like the shots or something about the scene or the way it's shot, how it affects you emotionally, you might want to look into why you respond so well to that scene or that shot. Like, understand what's happening in that scene, what's the story and emotional context of that scene, and how are the shots pushing that sort of emotion. And the reason why I tell you to think about this is so that when you have to come across a scene that evokes that same feeling, you have ideas and arsenals of different shots that you can use. When I study film, I like to draw each shot and just study it. I just sketch it, just so I'm constantly thinking about it. Look how it's edited, look how the shots are arranged, and when things are pushed back, when things are pulled apart, how does the camera movement or the editing emphasize the emotions conveyed in that scene. I think it's a good idea to practice pitching your board, so you're flipping through your panels one panel at a time and you're pitching it to yourself or pitching it to someone. I do think pitching is still a valuable skill, even if a lot of the Western animation productions expect animatics and timed boards. Like, when you pitch, it's to help you get the idea across naturally, as well as getting the intentions across naturally. With animatics, sometimes that stuff can be missed. And another reason why I would encourage you to pitch your sequences to someone else is because you might be so tunnel visioned that whatever makes sense in your head might not make sense to someone else who is looking at your sequence for the first time. Like, for any session of feedback and things like that, it's good to get second eyes on it to get a different perspective. And maybe that perspective can give you ideas on how to improve those boards even further. So when you're just focusing on storyboards, I encourage you to be more economic and don't try to overboard with so many panels with too much animation. I would say it's smarter to be effective with your panels, with your storyboards. Like, you can pose it out later if you want to, or if that's something that you want to pursue, but I think for true storyboarding, just focus more on the simplicity of the scene and the main beats. You might be over animating if you're constantly thinking about the spacing, the little nuances and intricacies, the breakdowns, the arcs and the movements. I think that's getting into the realm of animation. And as an animator myself, I do like to do that kind of stuff in my storyboards, but even I will say, and something that I will agree with, is that shouldn't be expected as a board artist. I think another sort of advice that I'd like to give is when you're boarding a scene or story, make sure you understand the point of the scene or the story. I think when I was new, I wanted to show possible studios and recruiters that I could do everything. So I had scenes that had a bit of comedy, a bit of drama, a bit of seriousness, a bit of the mundane, and that actually worked against me because the scene didn't know what it needed to be. So if you're boarding a very mundane and serious dramatic scene, that whole sequence should reflect that. With more moody boards, subtle acting, and the scene is meant to be funny, just focus on amplifying that comedy. And I'm not saying that you can't mix comedy and drama, especially if you're going for something that's corny and campy. You just have to make sure it serves the sequence. So I think those are some general advice and tips that I'd like to share, especially to those starting storyboards and trying to get into it. I think storyboarding by itself is a very huge and diverse world. There's a lot of different things to cover of that, but I think in terms of boarding for the sake of boarding, these are the general notes that I'd like to give. Now, if you want to hear me talk more about how to push a scene, how I think about my rough stages of storyboarding, how I think about the planning and all that, I can definitely make videos on that. But I think these are the ones that I want you guys to think about, especially if you are interested in boarding or if you feel a little lost about storyboarding. So anyways, I hope that helps. Bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.